Hello, everyone. My name is Evan Miyazono. I lead the Network Goods team at Protocol Labs, and I am kicking off the Funding the Commons track at Shelling Point. Thank you all for joining. Love this excitement. So much excitement over coordination mechanisms. I love this is great. I am going to be talking specifically for the first 15 minutes on how humanity needs better coordination systems. And I will mostly be talking about this, but there's also a brief overview of what we're doing here for the rest of the day in this particular tent. As you probably know, this is one of 4 tracks going on in addition to the Wellness Hub. Most of the other ones are in that, I guess I'd call it a building, that thing over there. But we are the track that's out here. Funding the Commons is its own set of events, and we are graciously hosting a pop-up thanks to collaboration with Gitcoin and Shelling Point. Funding the Commons is a project within Protocol Labs. For those of you who don't know, we're the company behind IPFS, Filecoin, a bunch of other projects that are focused on making sure that people have control of their data and the ability to control who has it, who gets it, how it gets to where it's going, how it's structured, etc. We, in addition, have a bunch of other things that we think are very important for improving the internet computing technology to move humanity forward. I like to frame this as we are embedding human rights into digital infrastructure. And within that umbrella comes the Network Goods team, which I lead. And this includes things like Funding the Commons and a few other projects I'll mention in a bit. Our mission is to build tools and opportunities for revolutionary collaborations, and I'll unpack that a bit more as well. Specifically, rolling right into what these coordination systems might be, I would say that humanity has a lot of these. You can imagine insurance, like corporations, the financial derivatives, Bitcoin, markets, like mechanisms like democracies or checks and balances, or even peaceful resistance like sit-ins, the printing press, assembly line. All of these things I would highlight were invented at some point. And I would pause for a moment to let you imagine what it would be like to be the person who sat down, identified one of these as a new way that humans could get a bunch of people together to accomplish shared goals more effectively, either more peacefully, more quickly. It's hard to look at the world and pick these out until you see a few examples. But once you have a few examples, it's really easy to start pattern matching. And I would love to hear if there are other things that you can think of that should be on this list that aren't. This is obviously a narrow subset of the things that I would consider coordination mechanisms. But if you start to look for not just what we have, but also what we could have, and where there are failings, where new coordination mechanisms could be applied, I think this starts becoming really interesting. I think we have the technology to make a lot of this much easier, especially when we move things like the financial assets through cryptocurrencies generally on-chain into interactions that don't really require the same kind of like bureaucratic hurdles to be jumped in order to implement new systems. So I think that you can look at history and see tons of coordination systems. But also, as you look to the future, it should look like both the difficulty to implement a new one and the ability to generate novel coordination systems should start exponentially growing. And so I think that this is a very interesting, exciting time for these systems. It's also really compelling because I would claim that the future will look roughly unrecognizable in 10 or 20 years. This is definitely a claim rather than a fact, but you can look at a lot of the trends that we're seeing and identify that there will be qualitatively different shifts around how civilization works, either in the face of new developments in artificial intelligence or brain-computer interfaces or climate change. You can look to science fiction, and it's pretty obvious that some of these things can be predicted. Jules Verne did a great job predicting a lot of aspects of the future, but also so did George Orwell. And so I think it's pretty important to be able to look at those examples, extrapolate from what works and what doesn't, and try to address these things far earlier than otherwise would be possible, especially in light of the fact that the way human culture and society tends to work is that people, and like this is just part of being human, we all look at the things right in front of us or immediately around us. I like to generalize the idea of affordances from design, where like a push bar on a door implies that you should push it. A button is something that you should press. A scroll bar is something that you can scroll. But there are also career affordances, like job postings are an affordance for career directions, and like knowing that startups exist is a new affordance. People don't necessarily have all the affordances to know what possible is, and so creating something like Funding the Commons is creating new affordances, and people will follow the affordances that they see toward their local incentive optimizations. And this is just something that is part of human nature. There's like, what you see from that optimization is very well described by the saying, no single raindrop feels responsible for the flood. There's also the reframing of, you're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic. As a human in society, we are all more responsible for the problems that markets or capitalism or our representative democracies are making than we might initially think. And that responsibility is both a burden, but also a power. This should be, feeling responsible should be both creating some amount of guilt, but also some amount of empowerment. We can actually fix these things, and we don't necessarily fix them by just interacting with the systems in the affordances that they offer us. There's more to being in a democracy than just voting, and I feel like in both we've lost sight of that, and we've lost sight of taking that and applying it via other analogies to creating new affordances within democracies or others. I would highlight this, for those of you who don't know Hanlon's razor, it's never ascribed to malice what could be adequately described with stupidity. I actually like this framing a lot better. It predates Hanlon's framing, but it's originally in German, so you find it a little bit less frequently. But misunderstandings and lethargy produce perhaps more wrong in the world than deceit and malice do. At least the latter two are certainly rarer. And this, when I read it, is a coordination problem. We just need better coordination systems, and we can reduce the impact of these sorts of things. There's this talk, which I am a big fan of, that highlights corporations as artificial general intelligences, which I think is actually a really good model, especially if you're worried about paperclip maximization, where in this case, paperclip is share price. And I don't mean to single out Facebook individually. This is part of a larger system in which we live. When I say that we need better coordination systems, I also want to leave you with some directions of what this could look like. There are a bunch of directions that Protocol Labs and specifically the Network Goods team is working on. We have a tool that will be up in, I think, 2 talks from now called HyperCerts that we're really excited about, that we think can incentivize the creation of new positive externalities more robustly. We have an additional tool for incentivizing the immediate and continuous sharing of knowledge creation to try and revolutionize how we do science. We also have mechanisms for organizing and creating faster, temporally scoped nonprofit efforts. We have another project called Governance for Git. Git, as you might know, is very effective in that it's this delightful hybrid of forkable, what I call forkable autocracy. The maintainers can control everything, but anyone can be a maintainer, basically. This project introduces voting. Why not have a primitive tooling that is democracy in this system so that you can opt into that if you want? And then the last thing I wanted to highlight is that we have this movement, Funding the Commons, where we're trying to not just build things and demonstrate our things, but create an ecosystem where other people can come and talk through and collaborate on various other mechanisms and coordination systems that they are trying to build. So welcome to this last project of ours. Very excited to have you here and very glad to be building this community and being welcomed as part of the Shelling Point community. In terms of things that we're interested in, there's a couple of things on here that I realized there are great opportunities that feel like very low-lying fruit, in my opinion. This is basically all research questions, but these are a bunch of research questions around how novel mechanisms like liquid democracy or quadratic voting would perform with reasonable assumptions, or open peer review for better science, might perform in realistic systems that one could simulate. If you know of any researchers who are have backgrounds in behavioral economics or agent-based modeling or multi-agent systems, these are questions that I would be happy to try and get grant funding for. I will be posting these slides online and they'll be all recorded, so feel free to, please share those. Additionally, there are a bunch of opportunities for new tools, new implementations of these novel coordination systems. There are things that people are proposing, but not necessarily implementing. I just realized that MACI, minimum anti-collusion infrastructure, is not on here, and I would love to see ways of making that either easier to understand or easier to explain. I think that it solved kind of the biggest problems about electronic voting, and all the cryptography experts are still out there saying, we don't know how to do online voting, and I think that they might not know about the solution that MACI brings. Generally, I think that it would be super impactful to have tools that are so easy to use that in the same way that people will use like Web2 tools like Venmo or something, some app to pay like each other when a group of friends go out to share a meal. I would love to see some interesting tooling like decision markets or quadratic voting in order to decide where to go, because in getting people to adopt those in their day-to-day life, you create habits where people engage more with better tooling. And so when they start engaging in their local or federal or other scale elections, you see people reaching for the same tools, which are better, like fundamentally, provably better at eliciting what people want, aggregating those beliefs, and helping people execute against them. Generally, I think that building these first and getting them into people's hands is something that is going to be incredibly impactful and can be done with any community you are in at any scale. For instance, I am considering implementing hypercerts, which we've, not implementing, I'm considering using hypercerts, which will be discussed later in this track, in our internal performance reviews, because I think it's a fundamentally better way of tracking who did what and who deserves credit, because it's all agreed upon at the time of the collaboration. So try to, as you go through this track, think about new ways you could use the tools that are being described and new tools that you could build or propose or collaborate on with others here to solve the problems that you see most frustrating or highest friction within your day-to-day or month-to-month life. Other than that, I would say if you have any questions that you would love to see added to those lists, please email commons@protocol.ai. We'd love to add them to a database of open problems that we're willing to help coordinate, help fund. And if you have any ideas on any of those, we would love to have you present at a future Funding the Commons. We're looking at having these events at least quarterly. We'll probably have 2 large events in person per year, in addition to a large number of smaller events similar to this one as pop-ups at various other events. And as far as this particular event, I will highlight that we have 2 rough components. The first is talking about creating knowledge artifacts. The first is creating knowledge artifacts. There'll be a bunch of talks, presentations, and these are about new funding mechanisms and new funding entities, how to make them what they are, and how they work. And then the second half of the day, starting with around 1:50, is going to be a bunch of workshops that will consist of a few lightning talks, and then the speakers will break out into other parts of the tent and will lead breakout conversations. And so that should be really exciting. We did get feedback at previous Fund in the Commons of, I want to interact more with the speakers and the ideas and the things they're talking about. So we're accommodating that, and we're going to see how that goes as a fun experiment. And other than that, I think that I'm about a minute behind my allocated time, but I'll be emceeing the first half of this, and I would love to have you come find me, talk to me in between talks, particularly after I finished emceeing during the second half of this event. Anyway, thank you so much. And oh,